I've got a piece of paper in my hand that's older than most of the people watching this. Yellowed at the corners, soft as cloth, folded so many times the creases have gone white. I wrote it in the spring of 1966, sitting at my mother's kitchen table in Ohio, 22 years old, and certain I had life figured out. 4 things on it. 4 things I believed a man needed in order to be happy. Let me read you the first one, exactly as I wrote it. A house with people in it. That was number 1. That was the whole plan. I've carried this paper through 4 moves, 1 flood, and the loss of 2 people I never expected to outlive. And I kept it for one reason. Every single thing on it was wrong. My name is Raymond Whitfield. Most people call me Ray. I'm 82 years old, and if you're sitting somewhere quiet right now, a kitchen chair, a porch, the corner of a couch with the television turned down, then you're exactly the person I made this for. I wrote that list 60 years ago. It took me all 60 of them to replace it. 60 years of working, raising children, burying friends, sitting in waiting rooms, and slowly finding out that almost everything I chased didn't matter, and almost everything that mattered I didn't notice until late. What I have now is a different list. 5 things, not 7, not 10, 5. And I'm going to give you every one of them today, in the order life taught them to me, with the year attached to each one so you know I'm not making this up as I go. But I'll be honest with you about the 5th one. I couldn't have told you the 5th one at 70. I wasn't ready. It took me until I was 79 to say it out loud to another human being, and I very nearly left it out of this recording altogether. Stay with me and I'll tell you what it is. Here is what I was told, and I suspect you were told the same. A good old age means a full house, grandchildren in and out the door, money enough to be comfortable, a calendar with something written on most of the days. Stay busy, they said. Stay useful. Whatever you do, don't end up alone. So that's what I built. I worked 31 years at the same company. I raised 3 children in a house on a street where I knew every neighbor's first name. By 1990, I had the full house, the paid-off mortgage, and a calendar so crowded my wife used to tease me about it. And on a Sunday afternoon in 2005, at 61 years old, I sat in that full house and understood that I was one of the unhappiest men I knew. Nothing was missing. That was the strange part. I had gotten every item on the list I wrote at 22, and it hadn't done what it promised. That's the day I stopped trusting the list and started paying attention. The first thing came to me in October of 1996. I was 52. My daughter had moved out that fall and left 3 boxes behind for the attic. I picked up the first one and started up the stairs the way I'd done 1,000 times before. I made it halfway. I sat down on that 4th step with the box on my knees, and I stayed there a while. I remember the light coming through the little attic window and all the dust turning over in it. I remember thinking, nobody is going to know I stopped. And then, right behind that, I am going to know I stopped. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you what to eat or how to exercise. I'm 82, not a doctor, and you've had enough people talk down to you about your own body. What I'll tell you is what I understand now that I didn't understand on that step. I never wanted to be strong. I wanted something much smaller than that. I wanted to be able to say yes when somebody asked me to go somewhere. That's the whole thing. When a friend calls and says there's a lunch on Thursday, I want the answer to come from me, not from my knees, not from my back, not from whether the parking is close. The day your body starts answering your invitations for you, something quiet gets taken away, and most people can't put a name to it. I can. It's choice. And choice at our age is another word for dignity. I've known a man with money enough for anything who couldn't get down his own front steps. His world was 4 rooms wide. That's the first thing on my list. A body that doesn't argue with you when you decide to live your day. The second thing arrived in 2005 in the shape of an envelope. It sat on my kitchen counter for 4 days. I knew what was in it. It wasn't even a large amount. I want to be clear about that. It was the ordinary kind of bill that arrives in every house in America. But I'd had a bad month, and I let it sit there. And every single time I walked past that counter to get a glass of water, that envelope looked back at me. 4 days. A grown man of 61, 31 years at the same company, walking the long way around his own kitchen. Here's what those 4 days taught me, and it took a while to sink in properly. The amount had nothing to do with it. What was eating me was the dread. I have known men with a great deal of money who woke at 3 in the morning and stared at the ceiling. And I have known a widow on this street who lived on almost nothing, kept a garden, and slept like a woman with no debts in this world. What she had was quiet. Quiet is knowing the roof over you is settled for the month. Quiet is opening your mail on the day it arrives instead of letting it sit. Quiet is being able to say no to something you can't afford without feeling ashamed of yourself for saying it. So the second thing is money quiet enough that the mail stops scaring you. Not wealth, just quiet. Now the third thing. The third thing is the one I got wrong for the longest stretch of my life, and I'm not going to pretend it was free. Getting it wrong cost me something I never got back. A person, not a thing, and I'm going to tell you exactly what happened. Before I do, if anything I've said so far has sounded like your own life, tap the like button for me. It's a small thing, but it's how these conversations find the people who need them. By 2012, I'd been retired 3 years. 3 years of waking up whenever I liked. No alarm clock, no schedule, nobody expecting me anywhere. It was exactly what I'd spent 31 years looking forward to, and I want to tell you honestly what it actually felt like. It felt like standing in a hallway with all the doors open and nowhere to be. The mornings were the worst of it. I'd get up, make coffee, and by 9 o'clock I'd already done everything that needed doing. The whole day just sat there in front of me, wide and flat. I started eating lunch at 11 to break it up. That's the truth. I moved my own lunch earlier so the afternoon wouldn't be so long. And I want to be careful how I say this next part because it isn't what people assume. I had my wife in the next room. The phone rang often enough. I had people. What I did not have was one single thing in this world that would notice if I never got out of bed. Those are two different problems, and it took me most of a year to tell them apart. Now, I told you the third thing cost me something. Let me tell you about a man named Frank Delaney. Frank and I worked together 19 years. Closest friend I had who wasn't family. After we both retired, we kept up for a while. Coffee on Wednesdays, an hour or so. Same diner every time. And I noticed something happening in those conversations that I was too proud at the time to look at directly. I had nothing to bring. Frank had taken on a piece of work at his church. He was building something, arguing with somebody about a budget. He'd sit down with things to say, and I'd sit down with the weather and the news and whatever I'd seen on television, and I could hear it in my own voice, how thin it sounded. The Wednesdays got further apart. No falling out, no argument, nothing you could point at. It just got quieter, and then it stopped. Frank died in 2016. I sat in the back at the service and understood that I had let a 19-year friendship go thin because I'd made myself into a man with nothing to report. That's what it cost. That's the price of the third thing, and I paid it in full. So here it is. You need one small thing in this world that still depends on you. I'm going to stay away from the word purpose because people throw it around until it sounds enormous, like you're meant to go out at 70 and change something. I'm talking about something much smaller. Something that will go wrong if you don't show up for it. For me, it was tomatoes. I won't dress that up. In the spring of 2013, I put 6 plants in the ground along the south side of the house, and those plants did not care about my feelings. They wanted water on Tuesday, whether or not I felt like being a person that day. They wanted the cages fixed after the storm, and I started sleeping better. 6 tomato plants. That's all it took for the world to have a small opinion about whether I got up. It might be a dog for you. A grandchild who calls on Sundays and expects you to remember what she told you last week. A neighbor who can't drive anymore and counts on you for the Thursday grocery run. A bird feeder that empties every 4 days. The size of it doesn't matter even slightly. What matters is that it will notice. Because a man nobody needs starts to shrink, and I could feel myself doing it. The day something needed me again, I took up my full size in a room. The fourth thing found me on a Tuesday afternoon in October, in 2018. I was 74. Understand the position I was in, because on paper there was nothing wrong. I had my wife, 3 grown children who called, a church, a street full of neighbors, a diner where the waitress knew my order. By any way you'd count it, I was surrounded. And I hadn't told the whole truth to a single one of them in about 40 years. Now, I never lied to my wife or my children. But there's a version of a man that his family gets used to, and after a while you keep handing them that version because it's what they expect, and because changing it would mean admitting how long you'd been carrying something underneath it. When my son asked how I was doing, I said good, every time. For 40 years the answer was good. That October, a man named Walter Boyd was doing some work on my back fence. I barely knew him. He'd done a job for a neighbor and came recommended. Maybe 60. Quiet sort of fellow, worked steady. We'd been out there most of the morning and we sat down on the back steps to eat. And Walter asked me what I'd wanted to do before I went into the plant. Nobody had asked me that in half a century. I sat on those steps and told a near stranger something I had never told my wife of 46 years. I told him about wanting to teach, about the year I almost went back to school and didn't, and the reason I didn't, and how I'd thought about it more or less every week since 1971. Took about 11 minutes. Walter didn't say much. He listened, nodded once or twice, and when I finished he said, "That's a real thing to carry." Then we went back to the fence. I sat in the kitchen that night and couldn't stop shaking. It was relief. Pure relief. 40 years late. So the fourth thing is one person who knows the whole story. One person in front of whom you are not performing. And here's what surprises people. It doesn't have to be who you'd expect. It wasn't my wife, God rest her, and that isn't a failure of our marriage. We built something 46 years long, and part of what we built was a shape I couldn't step out of by then. Sometimes the person who can hear the whole story is the one who hasn't heard any of the earlier chapters. It might be somebody at church you've only known 2 years, a woman you sit next to at an appointment every month, a son-in-law, a stranger on a set of back steps eating a sandwich. Let me ask you something, and you don't have to answer it out loud. Is there one person alive right now who knows the thing you've never said? Because a story you've never told anybody stops being a story. It turns into weight, and you'll carry it into rooms full of people who love you and wonder why you still feel alone in there. That's 4. A body that doesn't argue with you. Money quiet enough that the mail stops scaring you. One small thing that still depends on you. One person who knows the whole story. Which brings me to the last one. And I need to be honest with you before I start, the way Walter was honest enough to just ask me a plain question on those steps. This is the one I've never said out loud to anybody except him. I couldn't have told it to you at 70. It took until I was 79. I nearly cut it out of this recording twice, but it's the reason the other 4 finally settled. If I leave it out, I've wasted your afternoon. It was a Thursday in February of 2023, and there was nothing wrong. I want to be plain about that, because you may be expecting a hospital or a phone call in the night. There wasn't one. Gray out. The heat had just clicked on. I was in the front room with a cup of coffee going cold on the arm of the chair, 79 years old, and I had every one of the first 4 things. My body still let me live my day. The mail didn't scare me. There were tomatoes in the ground and a feeder that emptied every 4 days. And I'd told Walter Boyd the truth on a set of back steps 5 years earlier. And I sat there and felt something underneath all of it, sitting low, the way a sound sits under a room. Took me most of that afternoon to find the name for it. I was still angry at myself. 79 years old and still angry at a 22-year-old boy at a kitchen table in Ohio. Because that boy had a plan. He was going to teach. He was going to have a room with 30 kids in it and a summer off, and something to say at the end of the day that mattered to somebody. And instead he went to the plant because his father was sick and his mother needed the money that spring, and he stayed there 31 years. Every week since 1971, some part of me had been holding a trial, quietly, in the background of everything. Behind the birthdays and the Christmases and the ordinary Tuesdays, a man stood in a courtroom in his own head, being asked to explain himself. And here's what I finally understood in that chair. It's the only thing I've learned in 60 years that I'd call wisdom. That man was a guess. He was a sketch drawn by a 22-year-old who had never buried anybody, never sat up with a sick child, never carried a mortgage, never had a friend go thin on him over Wednesday coffees. He didn't know what a life costs. He was guessing. And I had spent 52 years measuring myself against a guess. Then came the harder part, the part it took until 79 to be able to say. I'd been measuring the wrong life. While I was busy being disappointed about the classroom I never had, I had raised 3 children who turned out decent. I had stood beside a woman for 46 years. I had walked into that plant in the dark, in January, for 3 decades, and put food on a table. There is nothing small about that. I just had it all in the wrong column. So the 5th thing is forgiveness. And I don't mean the kind people usually mean, forgiving somebody who wronged you. That's a good conversation. It isn't this one. I mean forgiveness for the man you never became, for the business you didn't start, the house you didn't buy, the thing you said in 1978 that you still think about at 2 in the morning, the years you gave to something that didn't love you back, the version of yourself you promised somebody you'd be and weren't. You have to put him down. He was never real. He was a young person's guess, and you have been carrying him on your back up every set of stairs in your life. I put him down on a Thursday in February with a cold cup of coffee beside me, 79 years old. And I'll tell you what happened after. The other 4 went quiet. That's the only way I know how to describe it. They stopped being things I was managing and started being things I was living in. The garden stopped being a project and became a morning. Walter stopped being a relief and became a friend. The mail was the same mail. I was just a man opening it. You can have all 4 and still be at war with yourself in a warm room. I know because I did it for 5 years. Peace is what shows up when you stop auditing your life against a life that never existed. Nobody tells you that. Not at 40, not at 60. I'm telling you at 82, and I'm telling you because I'd have given anything to hear it at 50. I still have that paper, right here. 4 things in a young man's handwriting, and I've kept it through 4 moves and a flood, and I'm not throwing it out now. It's just a boy's guess, and I've stopped being angry at him for guessing. But here's the list I'd write today. A body that doesn't argue with you when you decide to live your day. Money quiet enough that the mail stops scaring you. One small thing in this world that still depends on you and will notice if you don't come. One person who knows the whole story, the real one, not the version. And forgiveness for the man you never became. 5 things. That's what 60 years bought me, and I'd have paid twice as much for the last one. If you've sat with me this whole way, and any part of it has sounded like your own kitchen, your own stairs, your own envelope on your own counter, I'd be glad to have you back. I do this most weeks. Same chair, same coffee going cold. Subscribe if you'd like to sit with me again. And I'd like to ask you something before you go, because I read every one of these and I mean that. Which of the 5 did you learn the hard way? And how old were you when you learned it? That's what I want to know. Not the tidy answer, the year, the room, the afternoon it landed on you. Somebody scrolling past this tonight is going to read what you write and find out they aren't the only one. And that's worth more than anything I've said in the last 20 minutes. I'm Raymond Whitfield. 82 years old, still guessing at some of it, and grateful you gave me your afternoon. Take care of yourself out there, and go easy on the young man who wrote your list.